We've arrived now at the end of chapter 2 of John's Gospel, and what could probably be called the start, the inauguration of Jesus' ministry. It starts with this event, this classic and cataclysmic event of the clearing of the temple. Let me read to you John chapter 2, verses 12 onwards. And after this he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples, and there they stayed for a few days. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts he found men selling cattle, sheep and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all of them from the temple area, both sheep and cattle, and he scattered the coins of money and changes and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves he said, "Get these out of here. How dare you turn my Father's house into a market?" His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." This is an event which I've said is cataclysmic in many ways and inaugural in others. Because if you wanted to start a public ministry, if you wanted to make an immediate name for yourself and gain attention for your ministry, then what would you do? How would you go about it? What would be the thing which would draw people's attention to you like nothing else? Well, here Jesus begins his ministry by going to Jerusalem, the very centre of Christian events, Jewish events, and there drives people out of the temple, something which was not done. But let's take it step by step. Verse 12, after this he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples. Now, this is interesting because mother, brothers and disciples, these are three different categories of people that he went with. Mother, yes, no mention of father here, by the way, and that's interesting. There are those who speculate that Joseph had died at this point, was no longer present for whatever reason. We just don't know. In fact, he's not mentioned again at all. And the reason for that is mysterious to us. And therefore it's totally without merit, I think, to speculate on the issue. All we can say is he wasn't there. His mother, she was there with him, and brothers and disciples. So it's a whole family event. Brothers here, now this is interesting too, because the term brothers is adelphos. It's the idea that Jesus himself had earthly brothers, people who were born into his family. They would be the half-brothers of Jesus. But that would mean that Mary was their mother as much as she was Jesus's mother. And presumably Joseph would be their father too. But there are many people who would claim that that can't be the case. And they argue it out of the grounds that simply that Virgin Mary was a perpetual virgin. This is a Roman Catholic doctrine, that she never slept with a man, she never had sex with a man, and therefore didn't have any earthly children in the normal possible way other than Jesus himself, when she was overshadowed by the power of the Holy Spirit. And therefore brothers is taken by them to mean something other than normal natural brothers or half-brothers. It's taken by them to mean people who are close family connections, maybe. I would say, though, that's rather like the argument that puts the cart before the horse. You want the conclusion to be what you've already made up in your own mind, which is the perpetual virginity of the Virgin Mary. But there is no such cause for that. There's no statement about that. And in fact, there is no need for it either. Unless you want to idolize Mary in purity sense, then there isn't any need for this at all. There may be a need for the Immaculate Conception, the idea that Jesus was not produced by normal human reproduction, because that way you can maintain theologically that he was not the inheritor of original sin. But that may be the point about the idea of the Virgin Mary, but there is no point afterwards to maintain her perpetual virginity, as Roman Catholics might do so, and other people might do so also. So I would take this to be the straightforward meaning of the word Adelphos, brothers. These are the genuine brothers of Jesus Christ, or half-brothers. And they would include people like James the Just and Jude. And if you want a corollary of that, at the start of Jude's letter, for example, Jude is not a normal disciple, but he says here, Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and a brother of James. That's interesting the way he puts that, brother of James. He doesn't actually claim authority for being a brother of Jesus. And yet, if you look at James's letter, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. And elsewhere, James is likened, this James here is taken to be the brother of the Lord. So there are other references too in the Bible, which I'm not can't pin down. Maybe I'll put them in the notices later on, where it mentions that James was the brother of the Lord. So here we have Jesus with brothers and with his disciples as well. So the disciples who no doubt had followed him, like Andrew and Philip and Simon and Nathaniel, they also stay with him for a few days. And it seems that Capernaum was like the base for Jesus at this time. He was living in Capernaum for some time. Maybe this is where he had his business, where he had his carpenter's business, and had set this up. And he stayed there for a few days, having come back from Cana in Galilee. But it was only a few days, because coming up shortly was the Jewish Passover. It was almost time for the Jewish Passover, so Jesus went up to Jerusalem. It doesn't say he went up with anyone in particular, but one would be surprised if he didn't go up with his disciples at least. Jerusalem, of course, was the focus of the Jewish religion and the place where the temple was, where all the sacrifices were performed, and particularly the Passover was centred upon that area, though it took place in each individual household. He made his way to the temple courts, and it says that's the outer areas of the temple where commerce and business had started to take place. And in the temple courts he found men selling cattle, sheep and doves, and others sitting at tables and exchanging money. Why this kind of marketplace was going on? Well, it was required really for people, if they wished to offer a sacrifice or have a sacrifice offered on their behalf, then they would sacrifice doves, or they would sacrifice sheep, or they would sacrifice cattle. And rather than bring your own dove along, a lucrative business seemed to be set up inside the temple to make it easier for people to buy and sell the sacrificial animals that could then be slaughtered within the temple on their behalf. Also, others were sitting at tables exchanging money. And I'm presuming here that it's the case that if you gave money to the temple, then you couldn't just give Roman coinage. It had to be a particular kind of coinage. I need to check that out, but that seems to me the essence of it. So all of these activities were activities centered upon temple life, temple doings, temple sacrifices, temple offerings. And they were sitting there exchanging money so that you could make your offering in the right kind of way. However, Jesus found this unacceptable, and for good reason, because this is something which is an earthly practice, a practice which might be deemed to be purely business and transaction and not a spiritual action at all. So He made a whip out of cords. Now that's interesting. A whip out of cords, so you can, where he got the cords from, I don't know. But to make a whip out of cords, you would take many cords together, probably put knots at the end of them, and then knot them together and attach them to some kind of flailing device. And using that tool, that whip, he drove all from the temple area, both sheep and cattle, and he scattered the coins of money, of the money changers, and overturned their tables. And to those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. How dare you turn my father's house into a market?" Now, I think what strikes me, and should strike anyone who sees this, that this is a person of some considerable power, authority, strength, courage, resolution, determination, and fearlessness. Because by doing this, he's going to upset a lot of people. And you can see how remarkable it is if you just ask yourself the simple question, could you do that? Could I do that? Could anybody that you know take on that role? Could you willingly go into whatever the equivalent is today, into some church where they're collecting entrance fees or something of that nature, and make a whip out of cords and kick them out of the church, or kick them out of a holy place where money is taking hands and money is being made out of it? I think the answer would be you wouldn't know anybody who would have the strength of purpose or mind or ability or character to be able to carry out an act like that. It takes an extraordinarily strong commitment to knowing what the truth is, to knowing what the right thing is, and to be able to carry that out. Most of us don't have that kind of fortitude. Most of us don't have that kind of strength. And it stands in stark contrast to the picture that we're often told of in Sunday schools of gentle Jesus, meek and mild. That picture is entirely false, because this is one of the strongest characters that you will ever meet. Someone whose determination and resourcefulness and courage knows no limitations, really. He will do what he needs to do, no matter what the cost or the regard may be, no matter what the effect might be on him, because he may well expect some massive backlash from this. Personally, being thrown into prison might be, one of the consequences of what might happen in those kind of circumstances. To stand up against that and to physically beat people out of the temple with a corded whip shows a resolute mind and a singleness of purpose which very few, if any of us, have. It's a very, very rare character that can do that kind of thing. So this is part and parcel of the character of Jesus, which we must not forget and must fully understand. The powerful, resolute purpose of some individual who has a knowledge of what needs to be done and is prepared to do it no matter what the cost. But I can't also help understand the idea that what you also have is a public declaration, as public as you can possibly make it, a public declaration of the start of my ministry. People would never have heard of Jesus before this event. And then after this event, everybody in the whole of Jerusalem will have heard of him. He will have created an immediate following and response and notoriety of some kind immediately following this event. And he knew exactly what he was doing when he was doing that. So to me, it has a twofold purpose. The resolute declaration of the purity of God's house and the zeal with which he carries that out, the single-mindedness of purpose, but also the public declaration that a new ministry has started and a new force has erupted which needs to be taken account of by all the authorities. Because, of course, he's doing this in the face of the acquiescence of Pharisees, scribes, the Sanhedrin. All of those people would have acquiesced in this. So he sets himself immediately against the prevailing norms, and he sets about correcting all of that. This, of course, is just the first instance of it, because this is the start of the ministry. But you also find the same occurrence takes place at the end of Jesus' ministry, in the last week of his life. Let me turn you to Matthew's Gospel, and we have Jesus at the temple, Matthew 21. This is after his triumphal entry. Jesus entered the temple area, and what did he find? He found the same people were back again. The same people were there with their doves and their cattle. They didn't get thrown out for long. And he then entered the temple area, and as he did before, as in the state of consistency, he drove out all who were buying and selling there. Another strong provocation to the authorities in this last week of his life. He overturned the tables of the money changers for the second time, and the benches of those who were selling doves. And he said, "It is written, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it into a den of robbers." So, 2 occasions, 2 cleansings of the temple, 2 massive expressions of powerful authority, which does not shy away from the use of force in order to accomplish his tasks. The idea of the whips, that was quite what most people would think of against the character of Jesus Christ. And yet we can see very clearly it is a central part of the character of Jesus Christ to be able to act decisively and with power and fortitude as required if necessary, to stand up against the things which we know to be wrong, and to be implacable in that stand. To have the character of Jesus then in this aspect is to share that character of someone who would be willing to clear out a temple. Now, as I say, most of us don't have that kind of ability. Most of us don't have that kind of spiritual fortitude. And yet it's an ideal for us to aim towards, to be able to at least take a stand. You see it in the lives of some Christians down the ages. People like Martin Luther, who in particular made the clear claim against the excesses of the Roman Catholic Church and said, "Here I stand. I can do no other." And it's this kind of a stand which is needed by the Christian church from time to time, and by individuals within the church from time to time. And yet it's the kind of stand which you never, ever see today. There is no equivalent of this kind of practice either of Martin Luther or John Calvin or of other great men of God throughout the ages, whether it's Augustine or Charles and John Wesley. You never see this kind of, "Here I stand, I can do no other. You must take what I say," or there is no other way. We don't find that kind of strong adherence to a truth or a principle in the church today. And therefore we don't have that kind of zeal. There is an explanation given to us at the end. He says, "His disciples remembered that it is written, 'Zeal for your house will consume me.'" And that's a quotation from Psalm 69. This is a messianic psalm. It's a psalm which speaks almost as if David here is using the words of a Messiah, a suffering Messiah. He says, for example, For I endure scorn for your sake, verse 7, Psalm 69. For I endure scorn for your sake, and shame covers my face. I am a stranger to my brothers, and an alien to my own mother's sons. For zeal for your house consumes me, and the insults of those who insult you fall on me. And the context then of this statement of the zeal for your house consumes me is that it makes me a stranger to my brothers. It makes me an alien to my own mother's sons. And insults will be cast upon me and will fall upon me as a consequence of this zeal for my house. There's no doubt that by doing this inaugural act then, Jesus alienated from his teaching all those who stood in the traditional way of the Pharisees, the scribes, and even in some cases members of his own family. This is an act which was, iconoclastic, breaking down traditions and barriers which had accumulated like dirt and debris amongst the pure spiritual teaching of the Bible. And Jesus starts off his ministry in this incredibly public way. And I suppose there is no other way in which you can do that. How do you start a ministry? Do you just walk around and hope that people come and listen to you? Well, he gathered notoriety from this point on. So people suddenly said, who is this Jesus Christ? What is it that he's teaching? Why is he so forceful and powerful in what he says? Let's go and listen to him because he's over there giving a talk now. And so he gathered huge numbers of people by this single act. It was clearly deliberate, planned, prepared beforehand, knew exactly what he was doing in order to start the ministry off. And here we have it in John's Gospel, chapter 2. Next we'll see how that was responded to.